Hello and welcome to Midlife Meltdown. I'm Ian and today's video is going to be a fairly short one just to discuss the topic of two key traits or two key behaviours that I think prevent narcissists from healing. And if you're questioning whether you think you may be a narcissist, if you've been gaslighted in the past to make yourself feel like you're narcissistic, or you're questioning your narcissistic traits, then these two traits I think will help differentiate you from a narcissist and hopefully convince yourself that you're not. So as always, if you'd like to support the channel, the best thing you can do is subscribe and hit the notification bell, and that will help us reach more users. If you like this video particularly, hit the like button and that will help share it around with more people. And if you have any comments or questions, things you'd like to see in future videos, or you'd like to get in touch with me directly, leave comments in the comment section below. I will respond to them. I also have my email address in the description box or in the about section. I'm happy to respond to emails when I can, or even schedule calls. I've had telephone conversations and Skype calls with viewers in the past, and if I can fit them in, it's something I'm happy to do again. So to go to the title of the video, I believe that there are two key critical behaviours that keep the narcissist trapped in their narcissistic behaviour, but also you can use to help differentiate yourself from the narcissist. So if you have any doubt about whether you're acting in a narcissistic way, there are two key behaviours that I think can differentiate you. And the first one is one I mentioned in a previous video, and that's humility. So the one thing that the narcissist will not do is have humility. And what I mean by that is really the ability to look at yourself and question, to self-assess. You know, I always think one of the key, strongest traits that you can have as a human being in any field of life is the ability to sort of run diagnostics on yourself, you know, almost as if you're a computer, and just assess yourself and your weaknesses and your strengths, and to do that continuously, not with the outcome of beating yourself up and putting yourself down, but to realistically assess what you're good at, how good you are at them, and what you do wrong. And that's a common trait that narcissists will never do. And the reason I reference that is as I come out of a narcissistic relationship and I come through, and some of the arguments and some of the disputes we've had, I know for sure that I've played a part in those arguments. You know, in a distressed state, I've been nasty, I've been hurtful. I think I've displayed narcissistic traits myself. You know, I've contributed myself to some of that behaviour. And I look back and I forgive myself for some of it, because although some of it was particularly harsh and some nasty words were said and, you know, it was all a bit out of control, I look back and I think all through that I was trying to escape the situation. My ultimate goal was to get away. I just wanted to be away from that situation. It's not something I was choosing to do. It's something I was doing that I wasn't coping, you know, with the stress and the abuse I was going through very well. But coming away from it, one of the first actions, I think I've mentioned this in the comments section before, one of the first actions I took was to go and apologise to all the people that I thought I'd acted badly towards. So in particular, my ex's family, you know, I'd said some nasty things, you know, that I'd learned. I'd said some nasty things to them. I'd lent on them a bit too much, you know. So there have been phone calls kind of in the middle of the night to some of them. You know, I'd kind of lent on them for emotional support through a lot of this, and it made me feel, you know, quite humiliated through some of it. And also throughout that, I even wrote a letter to my ex-wife's therapist, because, you know, she was alone in this country, her family are in another country, and at times I felt like my ex's therapist was the only person that understood the situation. So as I was going through particular aspects of quite nasty abuse and nasty arguments, you know, I felt like I had to reach out to her to be the only one who kind of knew the truth that could help me defend myself. And that meant making phone calls at silly hours of the morning sometimes as arguments were kicking off. And coming out of that, I felt very ashamed. I felt very humiliated. I felt like I'd lost my dignity as an adult. And the first thing I did was just write letters to everyone, you know, just with the view that, you know, I don't need them to accept the apology. I don't know if they will or not, but just to restore some of my dignity, and just to say, look, you know what, I didn't mean to act in that way. I'm really sorry I did. I'm really sorry if it impacted your life. And just to restore, you know, that feeling of adulthood, that feeling of being a rational person. And, you know, part of the reason that I do that is I hate that feeling of not being able to go somewhere in the world, or not being able to see someone, that you might bump into someone for the fact that you'd feel ashamed, or, you know, afraid of what you've done and afraid of how they'd react. So I don't like having that feeling, and I just wanted to apologise and just get it all out there and say, I was in a really messed up state, and I'm sorry if I impacted your life at all, and please accept my sincere apologies. And I don't say this to compare and say that I'm a better person. But it was very striking to me that, when I look back at it, I don't think, I apologised for the impact I'd had on the lives of other people unintentionally, really, but for my own selfish reasons. But I hadn't been really harsh or rude to anyone. I was just being a bit of a pain, really. And I felt the need to apologise, and I felt that kind of humility that I needed to restore my dignity. Now, when I compare that to my ex, who had actually, throughout this had offended a lot of people, particularly my family, had hurt a lot of people, had done some pretty bad things. When I look back now, and even to today, there's been no apology, no willingness to engage with any of those people, no chance of an apology, and I doubt that will ever come. And that's a very stark thing. And I think one of the key things that narcissists will never be able to do is to do that self-assessment, to do that self-appraisal and say, actually, what's wrong with me? What do I do that isn't very good, and why do I do it? And how can I improve myself? And that kind of leads me on to the second point, the second trait that's linked to that very closely and is a very distinct one for me is the constant state of being in denial. Now, denial, I think, is a deadly trap to be in, and it's a very easy trap to be in. And if I go back to my last video on how I get over the anger and resentment, I think one of the things that traps people in anger and resentment is denial. It's the unwillingness to accept that a situation's happened, or that things haven't worked out, or maybe that they didn't work out in the way that you wanted them to, and maybe you're not as strong as you wanted to be, or you're not as as good as you wanted to be, or whatever it is, you're not what you wanted to be. And that trap of denial, of not being able to accept the reality of your situation or of your own being, is a very, very dangerous trap. And there's a main reason for that, and it's very relevant in today's society, I believe. The main reason that denial trap is a deadly one is unless you can accept the actual state, the reality of the situation you're in, of who you are, of where you find yourself, you have zero chance of moving on with success, or very little chance at the very least. Now I'm just going to pause there for a second and apologise, because I'm going to carry on with this video, but if you hear any strange sounds, it's probably either my dog who's sleeping on a sofa way behind me there having a dream, or a dog who's sitting to my right, my younger dog, who also seems to be going in and out of sleep and having a dream. So if you hear any funny yelping noises, it's one of those two. I'm going to carry on because it's getting a little bit late and I'm running out of time. But to get back to the original subject of why denial is such a deadly trap to get into, is if you're unable and unwilling to accept the situation that you find yourself in, or who you are currently, or how good you are at whatever you think you should be good at currently, unless you can accept the reality of that situation, you can actually see it clearly and truly believe it, then you have a very limited ability or a limited chance of progressing from there. And the key thing to remember there is it's okay to suck. Like, it's okay to be bad at something. It's okay to be in a situation that you don't want to be in, because that's temporary. You can change that. If you find yourself out of shape, overweight, if you find yourself uneducated, if you find yourself in a job that you don't want to be in, those are all temporary states. Those are all things that you can influence. But the inability to accept those states and accept that you're not where you want to be keeps people trapped for a long time. And I think that's a key reason that narcissists stay where they are. And again, to compare my ex, and when I think about apologizing and why I wanted to apologize to other people, I have no problems admitting that, look, I was in a state that I didn't want to be in, and it wasn't healthy, and I'm really sorry about my behavior. But the reason I do that is it helps me acknowledge that was who I was then, and the moment I do that, I can move on, and I can say, okay, look, that's not really who I am. That's who I was on that day when I made that phone call. That's when I was reaching out, trying to get support. That's who I was back then, but that's not who I am today. It's not who I'm going to be tomorrow. And it's the same with anything else. If right now I feel completely out of shape. I had a very indulgent Christmas. I haven't really done that much exercise since I had my younger dog, and I could sit there and say, I can still run a 10k in fairly good time. I'm still in good shape. The reality is I'm about 5 kilos overweight, and if I tried to run tomorrow, I would probably be completely depressed with it. But that's a temporary state, and it's okay. It's easier for me to acknowledge that I'm not where I want to be fitness-wise, because I can start to influence that. I'm like, okay, so I can't run well anymore, so tomorrow I start training again. But when I look back at what my ex is willing to do and how much effort she's put into actually making that effort to apologize, it's zero. And I think worse than that, I believe she actually justifies and rationalizes why she won't apologize to people like my family, because she feels like they've never liked her. She's in this state of denial that it's her that was in the wrong, and that will trap her for the rest of her life. I think it's easier, like I said in a previous video, it's easier to move on than it is to accept that there's something wrong with yourself. And that's that denial trap. And the strange thing that made me think of this recently is denial is such a widespread, dangerous thing. And it's so prevalent in our society at the moment. And at the risk of getting very political, and I do follow politics avidly, I'm quite a political person, and I try not to kind of indulge in it in these videos because it's not really relevant. But in this situation, I think we see this playing out in our political systems in both the UK and the US at the moment. And what I mean by that is we've just had a general election. And what I mean by that is, let me give you some examples. We've just had a general election, another general election in the UK, in which our main opposition party, the Labour Party, which is effectively the Workers' Party, I would argue, similar to the Democrats, probably equivalent to the Democrats in the US, have just suffered a major, major defeat, the worst defeat for something like 70 years in the latest election. And albeit it's unusual circumstances, there are a big issue of the European Union membership at the moment, and that's really divisive politics. But they can't argue with the results. The results in the electorate, and also other parties in the electorate, other parties in the electoral system, that have been defeated in this. It's interesting to see their responses, because the response coming out of the Labour Party very clearly a lot of the time is that it's not a failure of leadership, it's not a failure of policy. They're going to the media are biased, people are racist, people are xenophobic, or whatever it is. The message coming out from a lot of the party is very much on the defensive. It's blaming other people, it's blaming a media campaign, it's looking at everything else other than themselves as to why they lost. And the one thing I used to love about running, or even triathlons, is particularly running, is when you lose in a run, when someone beats you, when you're doing a 10k race, a half marathon, whatever it is, when someone beats you, it's undeniable why they beat you. They were just fitter than you. They trained harder than you. There's very limited tactics. There's very limited technique that you can apply effectively. It just comes down to you've either done the work or you haven't. Maybe at some level, maybe someone's just doping and you're not, but that's excluding that aside, on an amateur level, that effectively someone's just done the work. And you can't come out of a race like that, or very rarely, maybe if you're feeling sick or something, you shouldn't have run, but, you very rarely come out of a disappointing result in a race with excuses. It doesn't allow you the excuse to say, oh, it was some other reason. Effectively, you just didn't train hard enough or smart enough, and you can't have denial. And what I see in UK politics, and I'd also argue the same with the Democrats in the US from what I see on the news, and it's hard without being there, but what I see in the US is, a Democrat Party going around every route they can in denial about why they lost the last election. And effectively, in my opinion, absolutely handing already the victory to Donald Trump at the next election. I don't see any other outcome other than another Republican victory. And it's that same narrative that's happening with the Labour Party in the UK, that rather than sort of sitting back and saying, okay, we don't like Donald Trump, whatever it is, and it's easy to criticise him as a person, as a president, but if he's that bad as a president, then how come you lost to him? He should be very easy to beat. But the inability for them to reflect and look back and say, what did we do wrong? Did we select the wrong candidate? Were our policies incorrect? Was our messaging incorrect? Are we playing the wrong tactics? That inability to self-reflect is effectively going to hand, the victory to their opponent again. And the best thing, in my opinion, the Labour Party in the UK and the Democratic Party in the US can do is take a step back, have some humility and say, you know what, we sucked. We did really badly. What did we do wrong? Let's admit that we did badly. Let's take a step back and realize that we just weren't good enough. And as soon as you do that and accept that reality, you can start to move on and you can start to address why you failed. And as soon as you address why you failed, you can start to improve. And that's the key thing. Narcissists are unable to self-assess and they're in constant denial about what they've done wrong. And while those two things exist, they will fail to move on. And as someone who's gone through narcissistic abuse and can pick up some of those traits, I would urge for anyone that wants to recover and wants to improve their life and improve their situation, make sure you think about your own humility and also whether you're in denial about, how hurt you are maybe. It's very difficult to stop and admit to yourself, what my ex did to me really hurt me. And, I feel really abandoned, I feel really betrayed, and I left myself extremely vulnerable and I'm extremely hurt and traumatized by it. But it's a lot easier to be in denial and say, I'm not, this person's just absolutely messed up and I'm fine. It's a lot easier to latch onto that denial and that anger and feel like, there was nothing wrong with me, that I was just done to, and this is just someone else's problem that impacted me. But, by kind of admitting to yourself and coming out of that cycle and saying, what, there was something wrong with me that led me into this relationship, albeit it's not intentional, but I have deficiencies and this is something that I allowed to happen, and I'm hurt by it. I feel betrayed, I feel abandoned, I feel destroyed by it. I'm upset, even to the point that you miss your ex. By admitting that and coming out of that denial allows you to move on from that temporary state and say, you know what, I am hurt and that's okay. I'm hurt right now and that's a temporary state, but I'm going to hurt a bit less every day and I'm going to move on. And also that there were things that left me vulnerable to this and those are things that I need to fix, but guess what, that's a temporary state and that's something I can now move on and improve as well. And that, just having that humility and not being in denial, I think, are the keys to rapid improvement and getting yourself in a much better place. And that's what I advise all of you to do. If you can get down and almost strip yourself down bare with those two things and just, give a real assessment of yourself, then you will improve day by day, and I think very quickly. And that's a really powerful thing.